You're not going to believe how absurd this story gets. Imagine sitting in your living room on a quiet Saturday thinking it's just another normal weekend, when suddenly a knock at the door flips your world upside down. That's exactly what happened to my cousin, Daniel. He's the kind of guy who keeps to himself, pays his bills, minds his business. But in the eyes of the HOA, that apparently made him a target. It all started with a letter in his mailbox, a notice that read like some kind of official police summons. Failure to remove unauthorized garden decor will result in immediate action. Garden decor. He had a small stone fountain near his porch, nothing more. 5 feet tall, maybe. Peaceful water trickle. Neighbors even said it was calming. But to the HOA president, a woman named Cheryl Huxley, it was unsightly. At first, Daniel laughed it off. He thought, what's the worst they can do? Send another angry letter? But a week later, things escalated. A group of men in dark uniforms showed up on his lawn. Black boots, radios clipped to their belts, silver badges that gleamed in the sun. They called themselves HOA enforcement officers. They acted like cops, ordered him to sign a compliance form, and threatened to fine him daily until the fountain was removed. Daniel's not a confrontational guy. He told them politely he'd take it up with the HOA board. That should have been the end of it. But these men weren't ordinary HOA volunteers. They strutted around like they owned the place, puffed up with fake authority, and when Daniel didn't cave, they decided intimidation wasn't enough. The night it all boiled over, I happened to be at his house, along with his older brother Marcus. Now Marcus isn't just any older brother. He's a retired Navy SEAL, a man whose entire career was built on handling high-pressure situations with absolute control. He was in town for the weekend, just to visit family, relax, and maybe share a beer on the back porch. None of us had any idea his training would come into play before the night was over. That evening, we were sitting around the kitchen table when Daniel's security camera alert pinged on his phone. He opened the app, and his face went pale. 3 men in black uniforms were creeping across his driveway, flashlights darting around like they were casing the place. One carried a crowbar. Another had what looked like a baton. They weren't knocking politely this time. They were breaking in. Daniel froze, whispering, "What do we do?" Marcus didn't flinch. He simply stood, adjusted his jacket, and said in a calm voice that carried more weight than shouting ever could, "Stay behind me. This is about to end." My pulse hammered in my ears as I peered through the blinds. The men circled the house, their radios crackling. The back gate creaked open. And then, with one violent shove, they forced the patio door wide. The so-called HOA officers had officially crossed into home invasion. Asterisk. The crash of the patio door echoed through the house like a thunderclap. Daniel's face drained of color, and I could see his hands trembling on the edge of the kitchen counter. But Marcus, his Navy SEAL brother, didn't move like a man surprised. He moved like a man who had been waiting for this moment his entire life. With quiet precision, he motioned for us to stay low and whispered, "Don't panic. Let them come to us." I couldn't wrap my head around it. Who breaks into a house over a fountain? These weren't officials. They weren't police. They were thugs in black shirts with fake patches trying to scare a homeowner into submission. But in their arrogance, they had chosen the wrong house. And the wrong night. The first intruder stepped into the kitchen, heavy boots thudding against the tile. He shined his flashlight across the room, muttering, "Spread out. He's here somewhere." His badge glinted in the beam of light. Cheap and plastic, but he wore it like it made him untouchable. Then, without warning, Marcus stepped from the shadows. His voice was low, steady, and deadly calm. "You're trespassing. Put down the crowbar and get out." The man jerked back, surprised. For a second, he hesitated, but bravado got the better of him. He raised the crowbar higher, barking, "This is OO business. Stand aside." That was his last mistake. In a blur of motion, Marcus closed the distance. He seized the crowbar hand, twisted hard, and the metal clattered to the floor. Before the man could react, Marcus drove him backward into the wall with controlled force, pinning him by the collar. It wasn't a wild fight. It was efficient, clean, the kind of move that came from years of training. The second intruder stormed in from the hallway, swinging a baton. Marcus didn't even flinch. He pivoted, caught the man's wrist mid-swing, and snapped his arm down with such precision that the baton fell uselessly to the ground. Then, using the man's momentum, Marcus flipped him over his shoulder and sent him crashing onto the hardwood floor with a thud that rattled the cabinets. Daniel gasped, but Marcus stayed silent, his eyes locked on the third man. That last intruder had frozen in the doorway, realizing suddenly what kind of opponent he was facing. His voice wavered. You can't touch us. We're authorized. The HOA gave us power to enforce. Marcus took one slow step forward, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. The HOA doesn't authorize felony break-ins, he growled. And you just picked the wrong house to terrorize. With one swift motion, he swept the man's legs out from under him. The intruder hit the floor hard, groaning. As Marcus pinned him face down with a boot pressed firmly between his shoulder blades, the three men who had entered with swagger and fake authority were now gasping for air on the ground, stripped of their confidence. Daniel's fear began to shift into something else, relief mixed with awe. His brother hadn't just defended the house. He had dismantled these imposters with calm efficiency, like a soldier dismantling a threat overseas. Marcus leaned down close to the last man, his voice a quiet growl that cut through the silence. You're not officers. You're criminals. And tonight, you've just crossed the line. Daniel finally found his voice, fumbling for his phone as he dialed 911 with shaky fingers. His words were rushed but clear. Home invasion, 3 armed men in fake uniforms. My brother has them restrained. Send help now. And as the dispatcher promised units were on the way, the weight of what had just happened began to settle. This wasn't about a fountain anymore. This was about exposing a corrupt system that had been bullying residents for far too long. Asterisk the next morning, word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Everyone was whispering about the fake officers, but nobody had the courage to confront the HOA directly. That was their power, the fear they held over the community. They operated like a shadow government, enforcing rules no one agreed to, but everyone was too afraid to challenge. But what they didn't realize was that Jason had already made his decision. He wasn't going to let his brother suffer humiliation or injury in his own home. He was going to expose them, and this time, there would be no second chances. Jason began gathering information the way he had during missions overseas. He quietly visited neighbors, asking questions in a way that didn't draw attention. What he found shocked even him. The so-called officers had been making their rounds for months, threatening families, fining people for violations that didn't exist, and intimidating anyone who dared speak out. It wasn't just about control, it was about money. They were lining their pockets at the expense of hard-working families who wanted nothing more than peace in their own homes. Jason's cousin, still shaken from the attack, begged him to be careful. These people, they don't care about rules. They don't care about the law. They think they own everything around here, he said. Jason put a hand on his shoulder. That's where they're wrong, he replied. They don't own fear. And once people see the truth, their grip will break. That night, Jason watched from a distance as the same SUV pulled into the cul-de-sac. The fake officers stepped out with flashlights, strutting around like predators circling prey. Jason studied their movements, their timing, the way they communicated with one another. It was sloppy, arrogant. They thought they were invincible because no one had stood up to them yet. But Jason had faced men far more dangerous, and he knew exactly how to dismantle bullies like these. The next day, Jason walked straight into the HOA ACE office, a small building at the edge of the neighborhood, guarded by the same smug enforcers. Inside, the board members sat around a table, acting like kings over their tiny empire. They looked surprised to see him, but quickly masked it with fake smiles. "Ah, Mr. Bennett," one of them said. "We've heard there was an incident. Perhaps we can come to an understanding." Jason didn't sit down. He didn't smile. He simply looked each of them in the eye, letting silence fill the room until it became unbearable. "You've been using fake cops to terrorize this community," Jason finally said, his voice steady but sharp. "You attacked my cousin. You've stolen from good people. That ends now." The board members chuckled nervously, pretending to brush it off. But Jason wasn't here to negotiate. He leaned forward and whispered, "I'm giving you one chance to walk away before everyone sees exactly what you are." The room grew quiet. For the first time, they realized they weren't in control anymore. Asterisk. Jason didn't wait for their answer. That night, he released everything video of the fake arrests, testimony from neighbors, proof of fraudulent fines. The story spread like wildfire through the community. Families who had stayed silent suddenly found their voices. People who had once feared retaliation now stood shoulder to shoulder, demanding justice. The HOA's empire crumbled overnight, their lies exposed under the weight of undeniable truth. The fake officers were arrested within days, their badges nothing more than cheap props. The board members tried to run, but they couldn't escape the mountain of evidence Jason had unleashed. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free, its chains broken not by law but by courage. Jason's cousin stood on his porch, watching kids ride their bikes without fear, neighbors smiling and greeting one another again. He turned to Jason with gratitude in his eyes. "You didn't just protect me," he said softly. "You gave us our home back." Jason nodded, his gaze steady. "Bullies only win when people let them. All it takes is one person to stand up, and the rest will follow." And in that moment, the neighborhood finally felt alive again.